Keto and crime, keto and crime. We uncover the grime on keto and crime. Keto and crime, keto and crime. Now is the time for keto and crime.
Hey everyone, welcome to Keto and Crime. Today we continue with installment 2 of our Mad Medical Experiments series. I hope you enjoyed the one on the Minnesota starvation experiment. If you've not seen that one, I'll link it above. But basically I'm going to do a whole series on just really weird, creepy, or even evil medical experiments that have been done on humans throughout history. And so this is the second installment, and whereas I think the Minnesota starvation experiment was just kind of neutral, I mean, everybody knew what they were getting into, they signed waivers, they were aware, and it was for, you know, a good cause of helping to refeed the people of Europe after World War II. This one, the Tuskegee Experiment, or as it's known, the Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. We got a lot of good treatments out of it, yes, for the disease, but is it neutral? No. This one was downright dirty, and we're going to talk about it today. But with that being said, if you'd like to support the channel, links are down below. Channel members, patrons, thank you so much. Subscribers, like, comment, share, subscribe. Also, if you'd like to help the channel on a one-time basis, my links are down below for that, as well as you can support us through our sponsor, Keto Crisp, also linked down below, and you get something really tasty for your money. I've got all kinds of benefits over at my Patreon, things like that, so I appreciate every bit of help. It really helps me be able to sustain the channel and just purchase the things that I need for the channel. So, with that being said, let's dive in to the Tuskegee Experiment. First of all, the subject of this study was syphilis, a well-known sexually transmitted infection. It has a myriad of symptoms, from ulcerated, firm pustules that pop up on the body to dementia, aka 𝐲𝐭𝐸. Check out my video on 𝐲𝐭𝐸 and the St. Valentine's Day Massacre if you want to hear more on that. But yes, the gamut is just unbelievable. In fact, syphilis is known as the great imitator because it does cause symptoms similar to so many other diseases, from rashes to sores to fever to even dementia. It can be mistaken for Alzheimer's. Just it's weird. It's most commonly spread in two ways: through sexual activity, unprotected sexual activity, and transmitted from mother to child during birth. This is known as congenital syphilis, and it usually happens when the baby passes through the birth canal, much like HIV is spread that way as well, from mother to child. Now, syphilis is one of the most least preventable. It's still in the 90th percentile, whereas most condoms, they say, are 99 or 98% effective. Protection against syphilis is somewhere in the low 90s. So be careful. Just be careful when you're out there. I don't want to ever be out there again. But so it's one of the least preventable, and at the time of the study, around 1932, very little was known about syphilis, and so that's the reason that this study took place, which, again, I have nothing against medical experiments that involve humans, as long as said humans are not exploited, they are well aware of what they're getting into, and fully educated on what's about to happen. Unfortunately, that did not occur during the Tuskegee Experiment. Let's dive in. In 1932, the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, yes, the one in Atlanta, in collaboration with Tuskegee University, a historically black university, in Alabama, as well as the local health department, decided they were going to study the effects of syphilis on African American males. The actual study was slated to last only 6 months. However, it lasted about 40 years. 1932 to 1972 when it was finally ended, and think about that. It's like almost 50 years. It's 50 years ago. So, my God, I'm old. I was born in 75. But anyway, they wanted to study the effects of syphilis on African American males. Now, did they enroll college students that were enrolled in maybe the science programs at Tuskegee? No. Did they enroll test cases from all over the country that were well aware of what they were getting into? No. They enrolled right at 600, initially, 600 poor sharecroppers from the local area. So they picked the poorest of the poor, the most uneducated of the uneducated, and enrolled them in this study without telling them the full extent of the study, only promising them free medical care. Now think about that. You're poor, you're sharecropping, and sharecropping was a pretty cantankerous, feudalistic, evil system that was enacted just after the Civil War, after the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves. This whole system of sharecropping was sprung up because where are these newly freed slaves to go? Because they went to the cities in the north or the cities in the south. They were just as discriminated against as they ever were. They found it hard to find work. So in the rural south, you had almost this feudal system. It was essentially a feudal system back where a lord controlled property, and the people that worked for him were indentured to him for so many years, and they had to pay whatever they worked on the land, whatever they profited from the land, they had to pay a portion of that back to him for the right to live and work on the land. And that's basically what sharecropping was. You had these large plantations now split up into farms, and they would allow freedmen to work them and live there. And all contracts are different. Some they were actually working for ownership of the land. Some it was just a lifetime rental. Think about that. But it really depended on the ethics and morality of the person that owned the land. And so these freedmen would work this land usually for about 40 years was the standard, was the average. And they would give about anywhere from 40 to, 10 to 40% of whatever they grew back to the landowner, who would profit off of it, and they kept the rest and sold it for money or ate it or whatever. So it really kept them in a state of abject poverty. And much like happened during slavery, they still did not have full rights. So stable African American families, were still not really a thing. They were more stable than they were during slavery, but not a thing. And so sexual promiscuity was pretty rampant among the sharecroppers, and poor whites too. It was not just African Americans that were sharecroppers. Poor whites did it too. So it was just really everybody. So sexual promiscuity pretty rampant. And of the 600 that were initially enrolled, 399 had latent syphilis, which means syphilis that has not exhibited symptoms. Or if they did exhibit symptoms, it was very, very mild. And then there was another 200 some odd men that did not have syphilis, and they did not tell anybody about their status. They were told it's a study about diseases, not really which disease, and then they were tested, and they did not tell them about their status. So what's going to happen? These men are going to go out and still do what they do and spread it around. Let's spread it around. 40 years. 40 years. Your government, the CDC, 40 years. But why? Why African American males? Why these African American males? Well, 1928, the Oslo study of untreated syphilis had done extensive studies on untreated syphilis in Euro males, white males, and it actually kind of posed the question, does the disease act differently with different genetics? So that is the reason for, in 1932, the Tuskegee Experiment. As I said, it's supposed to last 6 months, ended up lasting 40 years because of a funding issue. And so, Tuskegee University, U.S. Public Health Service, CDC, came together and enrolled 600 men until they would have received free medical care, tested them, did not tell a huge portion of them that had syphilis that they had syphilis, told them they had what is known as bad blood. What the heck is that even? And basically kind of watched them suffer. They did treat them for the symptoms, but did not treat them for the syphilis itself. And you know what treats syphilis? Penicillin. Simple antibiotics. Kill it. Done. Gone. They could have treated these men and cured these men, but they didn't. They treated their symptoms and let them go out and spread it around. And they simply told them they had bad blood. All right, so yes, they did receive great medical care for their symptoms. Care they would not have received, because like you said, these are the poorest of the poor. But they let the diseases advance in them. They did not kill it. So many of these infected suffered mental illness, heart disease, bone disease, blindness, deafness, fatigue, anemia, just because these doctors couldn't shoot them up with some penicillin, or wouldn't shoot them up with some penicillin. It's supposed to last 6 months, but due to funding cuts in the U.S. government, it was kind of stopped, but not stopped. I don't even understand how this is, well, this was the 1930s, this is how this is ethical, but they just sort of stopped the study officially, but unofficially carried it on. So that's how the study was officially stopped. And as time went on, these men infected wives, who infected children, who went out and infected more people. And at the end of the study, which was only ended because of an investigative reporter, somebody leaked some stuff in 1972. It was officially ended because of an investigative report. Over 100 of the original test subjects had died, and the others had suffered all meanings of maladies related to syphilis, life-changing events, blindness, deafness, mental illness, you name it, heart attacks, strokes, and had affected countless others with syphilis, both through sexual activity and through passing from mother to child. And I'm sure you're thinking, Tracy, well, if they were treating their symptoms, why did it get that bad? Because once the funding was cut off originally and they kind of went into the unofficial study, they stopped treating even the symptoms. So these people were just, instead of shooting them with penicillin, killing the syphilis, and letting them go about their life ways, they just let them go. Let syphilis run its course and murdered these people. Murdered. World War II hit in 1941, and about 250 some odd of the participants either registered for the draft and were drafted or enlisted, and so they went and spread it all over Europe. So how many people contracted syphilis as a result of the Tuskegee experiment? We'll probably never know. As I said, symptoms were treated, minimal treatment for the disease itself. It included old-timey cures for it like mercury. You know, so things that didn't work. And then by the end of 1947, when penicillin was recognized as the cure, did they call all these people back in to cure them? Yes and no. They sent out a special, what would be considered clickbait letter, last chance for special medical treatment, but being that the medical treatment that they had received, the men had been receiving all along, was questionable, some of them chose not to go. And so if you came back in, were given penicillin to eradicate their syphilis, were told they had syphilis, finally, 13 years later, but some didn't. And as a result, when that leak came out in 1972, officially ending the Tuskegee experiment, you had over 100 people originally in the, you had 199 dead from syphilis and accompanying illnesses. You had at least 20 to 30 wives affected by syphilis and countless children affected by congenital syphilis because they couldn't be bothered to tell the test subjects what they were being tested and treated for. And yes, the data that came out of the Tuskegee experiment and the 𝐲𝐬 experiment were beneficial in how to treat and prevent syphilis. I have a real problem with how the ethics of the Tuskegee experiment went down. Why? Because they were not informed. It's like, oh, they're black, so they don't deserve the same consideration as the white man that participated in the 𝐲𝐬 study. Dirty, dirty, dirty. Besides the data on syphilis, what other good things came out of the Tuskegee experiment? In 1974, the National Research Act, which basically wrote all the regulations for federal-funded medical research involving humans, so this could never happen again. So that was one good thing. But you realize that whenever a law is created, that somebody has done some shenanigans at some point that caused it to be created. Why can't we just be good people? In 1995, a multidisciplinary symposium was held by the U.S. Health Department, and they did a complete breakdown of the Tuskegee study and basically labeled it, was the bad that was done justifiable for the good that it came? And it was kind of a neutral decision, basically trying to justify what they did. Also in 1996, President Bill Clinton publicly apologized to the survivors and their community and promised never to allow anything like that to happen again. There have been many ceremonies where many of the participants were honored. At the White House, again, Bill Clinton apologized. A $10 million settlement was paid to the participants between 1973 and 1996. And many people who were participating in it, whether as control group, syphilis negative, or the syphilis group, the variable group, were great men. For example, Freddie Lee Tyson, somebody who worked on the Tuskegee Airmen experiment, or troop, was also part of this experiment. So a lot of good people involved, just not by their own free will. That's my big problem. People, that in a nutshell was the Tuskegee experiment. And if you wondered why there's continued criticism of the CDC, this might be one reason. I know we've come a long way, but this ended 3 years before I was born, so that hits home for me. So, anyway, that's the story of the Tuskegee experiment in a nutshell. But you don't hear about the 𝐲𝐬 experiment. So again, you have to ask yourself, why was this one different? Because they treated the participants as less than human. That's why it was different. That's why it was different. And it was wrong. Even though we got a lot of good things out of it, still wrong. And with that being said, I'll see you next time with another mad medical experiment. Keto Krime.